Good to see everybody today. I would appreciate your prayers for my mother. She had a little scare. I talked to her Thursday night at 9 o'clock, before she went to bed. And then at 3 a.m. she woke up, 3 a.m. Friday morning, woke up with feeling really cold, and she was like kind of nauseated and a little disoriented, tried to get out of bed, fell, hurt herself, and she had 103.2 temperature. And I talked to her at 9, and she wasn't evidencing any of that stuff. So thank goodness she called one of my sisters a little later in the morning, and my sister got her to the emergency room at North Kansas City. Evidently she had a UTI infection that went septic and got into the bloodstream, which can be deadly, especially for somebody at 89, right? So, but they got her on IVs and antibiotics right away, and her body just responded super quickly. And they sent her home last night. So we got her home last night. She's doing a lot better. But continue just to pray for her. So they said, we're so sorry to miss church tomorrow. So anyway, but appreciate your prayers for them. This series I'm doing, Riding the Storm Out. If any of you grew up in the 70s like I did, you immediately think of the REO Speedwagon title of a great album. I woke up this morning and put that song on just to get myself in the mood for this message. And then I picked a title for today's passage, Black Hole Sun, which if any of you are Soundgarden fans, this is a Chris Cornell song from Soundgarden in the 90s. Black Hole Sun. And I want to read to you a quote from an epic poem. And don't say it right away, but if you know where this comes from, just log it into your brain, and then I'll ask you here in just a moment. But it starts out like this: midway on our life's journey, I found myself in a dark woods, the right road lost. To tell about those words is hard, so tangled and rough and savage that thinking of it now, I feel the old fear stirring. Death is hardly more bitter. And yet, to treat the good I found there as well, I will tell you what I saw. Those are the opening lines to an epic poem. Anybody know where that came from? Which one? No, it's the opening lines to Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno starts out as a midlife crisis. Midway through my life's journey, I felt like I had a 3/4 life crisis a few years ago. I was wishing it would have been a midlife so I'd have had a little more time to rebound, but I read that in the midst of some of my darkest moments. Midway through my life's journey, I was 3/4 of the way through, I think. I found myself in a dark wood, the right road lost. To tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough and savage that to think of it now, I feel the old fear stirring. Death is hardly more bitter. And yet, to treat the good I found there as well, I'll tell you what I saw. Darkness is the theme of today's message. We started a series last Sunday on Job, and we covered the first 2 chapters. If you missed those, go back and pick that up. I'd really encourage you to pick that up. This whole series, we're going to jam about 40 chapters of Job into about 5 or 6 messages. But I promise you, these are really good, deep stuff that we all wrestle with. Job is dealing with the classic question of why do good people suffer? The issue is suffering. And as I mentioned earlier, we all know that there's this thing that some people would call karma, some people would call it you reap what you sow, some people would call it the reciprocity principle. But that is that you put good stuff out and you get good stuff back. You put some bad stuff out, you might get some bad stuff back. And that's that sort of principle, you reap what you sow, right? And all of the faith traditions have this kind of concept in it. But then you have this other situation that goes on where good people suffer. And suffering can happen to no fault of anybody's, just being alive on this planet. You can experience suffering of all sorts, of all kinds. Then there's another kind of suffering that happens, I think. All of us have probably done a few things where we had some consequences, and we didn't really like the consequences, but they're kind of a direct result of something that we did. Anybody ever suffered a few consequences from a bad decision? I certainly have, all right? So sometimes we get consequences, but here's the thing. Sometimes the consequences fit the behavior, but sometimes it can be disproportionate. If you think like if a kid doesn't clean their room, what would a nice, loving parent do? Yeah, maybe give them a timeout in their messy room, and you can't come out until you clean the room or something. I don't know what it would be, but a good, loving parent wouldn't give a kid cancer because they didn't get their room cleaned, right? So even sometimes suffering can be like, I know I did this, but dang, did I deserve like this, And then there's this whole thing about grace, which, by the way, Job's book doesn't dive a whole lot into grace other than as we get to the end of it, there's some very interesting dynamics of paradox and mystery that I think is wrapped in love and grace, all right? So that'll be coming more toward the end. But grace is where we get really good stuff that we don't deserve. How many of you love grace? I'm all for grace, So yeah, but here we're looking at Job chapter 3. There is no darker chapter in the whole Bible except for the crucifixion of Jesus passages, right? I mean, the darkest passage you can be. In the first 2 chapters of Job, let's remember, he was a righteous, blameless man, and he was a rich man. He had prospered enormously. But then there's this type scene with God and the Satan, and we talked about that last week, refer back to that message. And within a matter of moments, days maybe, who knows, Job loses 10 children. You lose one child, the suffering is off the charts, right? Lose 10, all 10 of your kids. Then Job loses all of his wealth, cattle, sheep, homes, everything devastated through natural calamities. Some of it's lost through theft, some of it's lost through natural calamities. And then Job loses his own health. So you think about relationship, finances, and health. That's a triple whammy, right? That is suffering and devastation with no cause of his whatsoever. It just happens. And so in the first 2 chapters, we kind of saw that little passage that I talked about last week, naked from my mother's womb I came. The Lord gives, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we talked about that a little bit, but then we dive into chapter 3, and we get a window into what Job was really feeling, what Job was really thinking, right? And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I want to read just a couple of verses from Job chapter 3, all right? And by the way, I've translated this in the Hebrew, and it basically takes every word for darkness, every image of darkness, and a few metaphors and mythological creatures of darkness, and references it all. Like completely exhausts the Hebrew vocabulary for darkness. That's what we're looking at right here in poetic fashion. This is where the poetry of Job begins. Verse 3, let the day of my birth be erased, and the night I was conceived. So let's not even curse the day I was born. Let's back it up to the night I was conceived, 9 months earlier, right? Let that day be turned to darkness. So how do the opening chapters of Genesis begin? Let there be light. Opening chapter of Job 3, let there be night. I mean, this is a reverse creation poem. The first chapter of Genesis, creation poem. First verses of Job chapter 3, decreation poem. Let there be night. Let that day be turned to darkness. Let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. Let the darkness and utter gloom claim that day for its own. Let a black cloud overshadow it, and let the darkness terrify it. Let the night be blotted out off the calendar, never again to be counted among the days of the year, never again to appear among the months. Let that night be childless. Let it have no joy. Let those who are experts at cursing. Any experts at cursing in the room? Come on now, be honest with me. Experts at cursing. You know, I used to, I grew up with a dad. I can talk about dad now. He's not here, right? So, I grew up, I got my mouth washed out with soap for cursing, right? Now, Dad could say certain special words, but not me, right? And, so I tried, and then I became a pastor, so I really tried to behave myself, But every now and then, when I had some terrible mountain bike crash or a crit racing crash on my, I'm racing and I'm in the heat of adrenaline and I'm like competitive and then bam, and then tear out of my body. And there would be times, honestly, where I'd just be totally zen. You lay there for a little while, you want to make sure you didn't break anything. And you're like, all right, I think I can move. Yeah, cool, everything's all right. But then about the other half of the time, I don't know why. I can't figure out why one time I'm zen and one time, it's like did anybody ever see The Christmas Story? Where the kid just spews this long thing of curse words. It's just like I remember one time I was in Sedona, Arizona, mountain biking with 4 of my buddies, and I was the pastor of the group. And I crashed and fell down a ravine and had sticks stab me everywhere and tore myself up. And a spew of profanity came from this pastor's mouth. Little did I know that less than a quarter mile away, there was a family at a picnic shelter having a family reunion. And out of the valley comes the expert at cursing. I wanted to go apologize to every kid, every parent. I was like, oh my God, and I didn't want them to know I was a pastor, right? Which wasn't the first time I didn't want somebody to know I wasn't a pastor. Anyway. Yeah, so let the experts at cursing curse and rouse the Leviathan. The Leviathan is like a mythological creature of darkness. Any of you watch the old swamp monster scary movies, where creature of the water comes out? This is like curse so much that you raise one of those out of the swamps of darkness, okay? And then it goes on, let its morning stars remain dark. Let it hope for light, but not in vain. May it never see the morning light. Curse that day for failing to shut my mother's womb, for letting me be born to see all this trouble. And then he goes on and gets darker, like to where he dives into death, and like death would be preferable to life. And he dives into that whole theme in Job chapter 3. So I don't need raised of hands, but I'm kind of wondering, I had, up until my mid-50s, I'd gone through ups and downs, good days, bad days. Some days I felt great, some days I felt down. Probably had mild depression from time to time, but I never had anything that would be categorized as like clinical depression. And I had never felt like I didn't want to live. But I went through some dark days where I would have preferred death. Now, I didn't have what they would call active suicide ideation, where I actually put a plan together to eliminate myself, but I had this what they call passive suicide ideation, where you just have this stream like Job of like wishing that you hadn't even been born, or that death would have been better, kind of an idea. And I wonder if you've gone through that kind of deep, deep darkness, then that's really what this passage is talking about right now. And Job is expressing this poetically. And so it's a dark, dark passage. And I was in that kind of place in 2019. And after I went through a divorce, had to sell my home, lost my finances, lost all this stuff, lost my career, my church, all this stuff, I was in a home alone with everything in boxes. And I'd literally prayed many, many times before, thousands of times, millions of times, that I would have never gone through the darkness that I went through. And yet there I was in that kind of darkness. And thank God, I want to show you a book here. I had a friend that I didn't know that well from the National Prayer Breakfast that I'd met 15 years ago. And he had caught wind of what I was going through. And he literally mailed me this book, like this book right here, through the mail, snail mail. And it was a book called Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. I would say that this book maybe saved my life, like literally. I had been in such a dark place. I wasn't reading. I'd started going to recovery, but I was still in such a dark place. And this was like the first book I read from that place of utter darkness. And I say it helped me put my life back together again. Richard is still alive. There's friends of his that are very close. I've been wanting to get him on my podcast, but he is battling lots of stuff right now himself, up in age and all that kind of stuff. But the other book that I highly recommend to people, if you've gone through that kind of deep darkness, is this one by Parker Palmer. Parker is a Quaker, spiritual director, and it's called Let Your Life Speak. And it's a little misguided. Listen for the voice of vocation. But he plumbs into the depths of darkness and teaches you how to listen to the darkness. Which I want to just say, how many of us have ever been taught to listen to darkness or befriend darkness? It's an odd thing because as humans, we want to avoid darkness, right? Nobody wants to sign up for deep darkness. Nobody wants to sign up for suffering. Nobody wants to sign up for any of that stuff. And we tend to want to push it away. We have so many comforts in this 21st century life, right? That we really have drugs and things that we can use to like push away the darkness, to numb it, to wash it out, to not have to face it. But one of the weirdest things about darkness is that it's almost like you have to recognize it and allow it and then let it speak to you. Let me give you another song. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Simon and Garfunkel. How many of you watched the cover? One of the most popular covers of this song, The Sound of Silence, is by a band called Disturbed. And if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend you go look at it. Disturbed, The Sound of Silence. And it's powerful. It's really good video. I've come to talk with you again. It's interesting that nobody wants suffering, nobody wants darkness, but God doesn't even leave the darkness. Even though it feels like God leaves the darkness. It feels like it. It can feel like an atheistic void. That's what my darkness felt like an atheistic void. I was out at Black Canyon of the Gunnison just actually I go there quite often right now. It's in southwest Colorado. I've been there many, many times throughout my life. And I was just there a couple of years ago. I was cross-country snow skiing in one of the parks at the south rim of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. And they have a bookstore there, a little gift shop. And I went in there, and I saw this whole section of books that was on darkness and night sky. And it caught my attention because of all the darkness that I had gone through. And turns out, I didn't even know this, I just learned this 2 years ago, there's this thing called International Dark Sky Association. And basically what they are tracking is how light pollution, artificial light, actually negatively impacts our ecological system. Artificial light can disrupt wildlife at night that thrives, how many nocturnal animals we have. It can impact human health. Think about artificial light that people don't get sleep now because they're staring at screens when they fall asleep and when they wake up. And artificial skies of city, like if you ever flown over United States in the middle of the night and there's just these spots of artificial lights just dotting the planet Earth, right? And this can waste money and energy. And so the International Dark Sky Association actually has a measure to certify certain places and counties as officially dark sky zones where there's hardly any light pollution at night. And I go to Ouray County almost 2-3 times a year right now in the winter and the summer. And Ouray County is one of the dark sky counties. And I actually just lay out under the stars at night. You know, I'm about 9,000 feet elevation and there's no light pollution. And I just fall asleep to the night sky watching the stars put on a show, a dark sky show that just lights up the place. Have you ever, on a full moon, you could just get out and walk at 9,000 feet through the woods with no light whatsoever, and the moon and the stars are just guiding your path. You can see the shooting stars flying through the sky on these dark sky nights. And you can also see satellites. I remember the first time I thought I was seeing a shooting star. This was back in, I don't know, in the 80s probably, up in the high mountains. And this looked like a shooting star, and it was just going like this across the night sky. That's going, they usually go, whoosh, like that, a shooting star. Whoosh. And this one was just like, and all of a sudden I realized, what is that? It's a satellite. So now we got sky junk up there. It's floating through, so you can see satellites too. But anyway, listen to what Michael Fox says, and he wrote a book called Original Blessing, which I'd highly recommend. And he talks about how we as human beings can get addicted to artificial light. He says, we whore after more. We whore after more. More images, more light, more profits, more goodies. A light-oriented spirituality, talking about light pollution, artificial light spirituality, is superficial, surface-like, lacking as it does the deep, dark roots that nourish and surprise and ground a large tree. The strength of that oak is in its root system that goes deep, deep down into the dark. There's something about the darkness if we turn and face it and even make friends with it, that if we allow, God can speak there. And let me just say this, the enemy of darkness is not the questions and the doubts and the disbelief that can come. The enemy of darkness is superficiality, easy answers, and isolation. Isolation is the enemy of health and wholeness and sobriety and mental health. When you go through deep, deep darkness, don't do it alone. One of the best decisions I made is I got in recovery and just started going to recovery morning, noon, and night. I went to, I don't know how many meetings I would have gone to over the first 90, 100 days of my darkness. But I rooted myself in a community of people that didn't give me answers, didn't give me advice, but sat with the questions and sat with the doubts and sat with the struggle for faith and belief. God, I believe, help my unbelief. This is the prayer that we pray in the darkness. Eddie Vedder, one of my favorite songwriters, wrote the entire score to the movie Into the Wild, which is one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite books. And John Krakauer, who wrote that's one of my favorite authors. He wrote Into the Wild, Into the, Thin Air, about Everest. He's written a number of great outdoor adventure books. But Eddie Vedder wrote this song for Into the Wild. It's called Rise, Rise. Such is the way of the world, you can never know just where to put all your faith and how will it grow. Gonna rise up, burning black holes in dark memories. Burning black holes. Title of this message, Black Hole Sun. Burning black holes in dark memories. By the way, there's no other book in the Bible that is as much nature-oriented as Job is. I'm going to spend a whole message at the end of this series on nature and what we experience in nature, because Job uses nature in his poetry throughout the whole book. He is immersed in some of the most beautiful, powerful metaphors of nature and what we can learn and experience through nature that's in any other book of the Bible. Gonna rise up, burning black holes in dark memories. Gonna rise up, turning mistakes into gold. Such is the passage of time, too fast to fold. Suddenly swallowed by signs, lo and behold. Gonna rise up, find my direction magnetically. Gonna rise up, throw down my ace in the hole. We're called to sometimes befriend the darkness and sit with friends in the darkness. And there's power in this. And healing can come when we face the thing we fear the most. And even death can be swallowed up in victory. Sam, I'm going to have you come on up, and he's going to play a song. This is actually from a friend, a person that's I knew quite well several years ago, but lost contact. Don Chaffer was a singer-songwriter from here in Kansas City. Sam knew Don as well, and this is a song of theirs that's hard to find, but it's the band's name was Waterdeep, and this song is one of their title songs, Waterdeep. And I'd actually never heard this. It's not on one of their albums. So Sam was like, I think this will work. And I was like, I think you're right. So